So the time is coming now for introducing our Dhamma Day keynote speaker, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. And I think almost all of you know him or know of him, as many of the texts that we're using now, the wisdom publications, middle-length discourses of the Buddha, and the connected discourses of the Buddha and numerical discourses of the Buddha have been translated by him into such wonderful English. You know, when I read these texts before as a young person, or as a younger person, you might say I'm still young now in my 50s. I'm thinking of maybe in my teenage years when I was trying to read the Polytext Society translations, then it was so difficult for me as a young American to understand. It seemed like Shakespeare and archaic, and it wasn't easy for the teachings to really be easily understood and touch the heart for me under those conditions. And only later on, after about 10 years in monastic life, then Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations that were together with his elder and Dhamma brother, the Majjhima Nikaya middle-length discourses of the Buddha, was published, and it was just so clear and had such like the life of the path, and heart was alive. Sometimes you read translations and maybe they're technically accurate perhaps, but somehow there's no feeling of the life of the Dhamma, like being alive within them. But in these translations, that feeling was very, very much and is very much there for me. And I feel this is the great benefit of having someone who has the scholarly ability together with really being dedicated to live the life of the path. These two things combined together are just so powerful. And now, actually, since we started with our Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha in North America, then Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi came back from Sri Lanka to the United States. And so we've had the opportunity to hear his teaching in person many times. And I'd just like to express my enormous gratitude. In 2007, already 13 years ago, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi offered a really groundbreaking paper to the First International Congress on Buddhist Women, which was called by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Hamburg, Germany. And that paper made such a big difference for so many people. I remember seeing a draft of it before we all went to Germany together. You know, I just got the feeling, it's like feeling like maybe this wheel can turn. This kind of sense, and indeed it did, and it has, because of the dhammas of harmony in Buddhist monastic life. It can seem very difficult to step ahead or to do something different than what all one's peers are doing. But I feel in the living of this life, if this life is well lived, our conscience should become even more clear. Our integrity should become even more intact, not less so. If it becomes less so, then there may be something wrong. We may be going in the wrong way somehow. So I know that happens sometimes because of conformity, or because of peer pressure, or because of not wanting to step out of line, or even not having real confidence in oneself. But like the venerable Upasika, noble Upasika, who realized stream entry on this Asalha full moon day so many years ago, while the Buddha was sharing his first teaching. not only did she gain confidence in the Buddha and confidence in the teaching as something external, but with her stream entry, she penetrated down into the roots and she gained the saddha, that confidence, that trust, that faith in what is real and true experienced in herself. And then, you know, these people become unshakable in a way. Yes. And the integrity, something special happens with the integrity. Those asawas, in a way, those cracks in the cup through which people can go into hellish states. Of lust, of hatred, of doubt, confusion, and fear. Those get sealed off at the bottom in a way. So one can really hold the Dhamma. It's not always leaking out and seeping away, but not the Dhamma necessarily as something external, but the Dhamma as realized within ourselves. So all these things become united and they become one gem in a way. The Buddha quality and the Dhamma quality or facet and the Sangha quality or facet, when one has such an experience, these are just different angles or facets of what we now call the Noble Triple Gem, which came into being on the Asalha full moon day. So many years ago, as the Buddha turned the wheel of the Dhamma and as Ayya Kondanya understood, and as Arya Sawika Upasika, the laywoman mother, Kali of Osprey's Hunt, of Avanti, also came to understand for herself, and the incomparable wheel of Dhamma turned in the world. So I'd like to check now and see if Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi has arrived with us. And if he has, then invite Ayya Sopana to give a proper introduction to him.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Well, greetings and welcome to everyone who's joined us. I think some of you are here actually, especially for Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's teaching. And I don't see him here with us yet. And, you know, at our monastery, for the offering of the invitation to enter the Vasa that happened, they had set up outside, and the Wi-Fi reception is okay outside, not the best. I heard that the devices that were being used were heating up in the sunshine. I read in the chat. So it was a beautiful place, and now they're going back inside into our Dhamma and meditation hall. Which is where we're going to be on the monastery end, with Dhammadharini Monastery as our host, where we're going to be hosting Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's Dhamma talk. So for all of you who are Sangha and old friends, welcome on this full moon day of Dhamma. And the day of the invitation to enter the Vasa. Tomorrow will be our entry into the 3 months of the Vasa. And to everyone who's joining us for the first time for Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's Dhamma talk, it's really just an honor and a privilege in this life to have such good companions in this path, in this living of the holy life. And I deeply appreciate Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi for all of his teachings. He used to, for some time, he was offering regular teachings to our Bhikkhuni Sangha, coinciding with the moon days. It's called the Ovada, or the instruction that the Buddha provided for the Bhikkhuni Sangha from the highly qualified senior bhikkhu teachers who have excellent monastic discipline and are well respected by the bhikkhunis community and have much respect and appreciation for the bhikkhunis community. So Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi certainly has qualified for that and offered us regular teachings over the years. And now he's at a monastery in New York. And I so much appreciate that he accepted our invitation, because this is actually the yearly retreat time for his monastery. And so he's going to be bringing that retreat ambiance to us when he comes on. Welcome to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. We're just offering some words of introduction and appreciation. Venerable Bhikkhuni Sopana, would you like to introduce Bhante now? Bhante, thank you so much for joining us during your retreat time. Very glad to see you. Venerable Bhikkhuni Sopanateri is now going to say a few words of introduction, and then we'll invite you to share Dhamma with us on this Asalha full moon day, anniversary of the Buddha's setting into motion the wheel of the Dhamma.
Greetings, Venerable Bhikkhu
Greetings.
Bodhi. I will only say in brief that since the Theravada branch of Buddhism has come to the West, you have been both a pioneer in bringing the Dhamma to the West and also a hero in protecting the authentic, full teachings of the Buddha and keeping that alive while different kinds of modifications and adaptations were rolling around in the Western countries. So we also, I think everybody knows your tremendous work in translation to English language of the important several of the Nikayas, the original early text of the Tipitaka. And we also remember that you were an early proponent of restoring the ordination of bhikkhunis, bringing it in the context of the Universal Rights of Humans and the United Nations Declaration and so on, with the authority and strength that you had because of your other Dhamma work. You were able to bring that gravity to the cause of restoring the bhikkhunis ordination some years back. And then more recently, we are quite aware of your continuing, almost never-ending work in translation, adaptation, and helping us to improve our understanding and our practice of the Dhamma now.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So let me begin in the traditional way with the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so I extend greetings to all of the bhikkhunis who are listening in on this discourse, and also I guess a number of other people are coming in through Facebook. So Ayya Tathaloka, about a month ago, she invited me to give a talk on this July 4th occasion, which is, of course, we all know that it is the anniversary of the American Independence Day. And so she asked me to connect the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta to the theme of independence. First, I don't really know whether the concept of independence, just taken in the abstract, is a valid concept. But in the case of the American Independence Day, what it means is the US, the original American colonies, establishing their independence from England. England was the imperial power, which was had established the 13 colonies and was ruling over those colonies. And then when the residents of the colonies felt that they were being oppressed by the British administration, they declared independence from rule by England, by the King of England. And that initial move towards independence was expressed in the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. So I think when we want to look for the counterpart to the Declaration of Independence, look for the counterpart to the Declaration of Independence within the Buddha's teachings. I think we find that towards the end of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And I wonder, I compiled a number of texts. This is my traditional way of teaching. Can I share the screen and then we can look at the text? Okay. Okay, so we find that what I call the Declaration of Independence towards the very end of the sutta, where the Buddha says that when his knowledge and vision of the Four Noble Truths was purified in all of these ways, then he could declare that he had attained the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. And then he says, the knowledge and vision arose in me. Unshakable is the liberation of my mind. This is my last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence. So this is the Buddha's declaration of independence. And what it means is, first of all, it is not a complete independence in a sort of broad and abstract way, but it is the independence of the mind, the liberation of the mind. So first of all, it's the liberation of the mind. And the liberation of the mind from what? The liberation of the mind from the bonds, the fetters, the asavas, all of the defiling factors that keep the mind in a state of bondage. So first, it's the liberation of the mind. And then in the second place, it's the liberation from repeated birth, since he says that this is my last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence, no more puna bhava, coming back to existence again and again. So it's, in the first instance, it is freedom of the mind. And second, it's freedom by obtaining freedom of the mind. It's freedom from bondage to the cycle of birth and death, the round of repeated existence. And now to understand the meaning of this Declaration of Independence in its fullest sense, I find it's useful to go back and look at a number of other suttas which constitute what I would call the background to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And I have these suttas. Are you seeing this? Okay, so what I like to do is to look at the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, not taking it in isolation, but to see it in the context of the Buddha's, the original aspiration or aim of the future Buddha, the Bodhisattva, when he undertook that quest that culminated in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So this, the sutta that I find sheds the most light on this is the discourse on the Aryan quest, the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, which is sutta number 26 of the Majjhima Nikaya. So here the Buddha is speaking to the monks, and he says that there are these two kinds of search, the noble search and the ignoble search. And then he continues, I'm sort of jumping around. So he says, okay, so the ignoble search is that someone who is himself subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death seeks things that are also subject to old age, sickness, and death. Being subject to sorrow, to defilement, he seeks what is also subject to sorrow and defilement. Then he enumerates these things, which are basically the goods of the world, the things that we ordinarily take to be of value, the material acquisites, personal relationships, and so forth. But the noble search begins when somebody who's himself or herself subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death understands the danger, the drawbacks, the defects in what is subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death, and then seeks the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. And here we have an important term, important expression, which in a way connects to the theme of independence, and that is supreme security from bondage. So bondage, the bonds are what held us in a state of bondage to old age, sickness, and death. And so when one sees the drawbacks, the dangers in the conditioned things of this world, then one seeks that which is not subject to birth, old age, and death. And that is, of course, it is, with one term is described as nibbana, but the other expression is supreme security from bondage. And this is to be obtained by breaking the bonds. The bonds are the things that keep us in a state of dependency. The bonds are the things like the decrees coming from the King of England, dictating to the colonists in the states of America what kind of policies they have to enact. And so what are these bonds that one is seeking to become secure from? So the suttas enumerate 4 bonds. We have the bond of sensuality, sensual desire, sensual craving, the bond of existence, the bond of views, the bond of ignorance. So when the Buddha set out on his noble quest, what he was seeking was to break free from the bonds of sensual craving, the bond of craving for existence. I don't think he had a problem with the bond of views, but the bond of ignorance. And so he sets out on this noble quest himself. He says, let me seek the unborn, unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, and undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Okay, so then he goes forth into the homeless life. He seeks out various teachers. He undertakes these extreme ascetic practices and finds that none of these are leading him to his destination, to his goal. Then finally, he reaches a point where he says that whatever ascetics in the past have experienced extreme painful feelings due to their striving, this is the utmost, there is none beyond this. And then he realizes that this painful practice of austerities does not lead to superhuman knowledge and vision. And he raises the question in his mind, can there be another path to enlightenment? And then he remembers when he was a child, under the care of his father, one day when he was sitting in the shade of a rose apple tree, just spontaneously, he crossed his legs, focused his mind on the breathing, and then spontaneously, he entered into the first jhana. And then at this point now, the question comes into his mind, could this be the path to enlightenment? And he realizes, indeed, this is the path to enlightenment. And so to support his body, in order to undertake these practices, he resumes taking normal food till he regains his strength. And at this point, the 5 ascetics who are looking after him abandon him, thinking that he's reverted to a state reverted to a life of luxury. And so he eats the solid food, regains his strength. Then he attains first the 4 jhanas, then with the mind purified and brightened by this deep concentration, he recollects his past lives. He gains the divine eye with which he can see beings passing away and taking rebirth. And then in the last watch of the night, he turns the mind to the destruction of the asavas, the taints, which are actually the same in content as the 4 bonds. He directly knows the 4 noble truths, and then his mind is liberated from the asavas of sensual desire, the craving for existence, and the asava of ignorance. And so he says, in the case of each of these knowledges that arise, he says, ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished and light arose. Okay, now after the enlightenment, he remains in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree for a certain number of weeks, sort of absorbing, digesting, assimilating the realizations that he underwent on the night of his enlightenment. And this period of digestion, contemplation, assimilation is described in the suttas, a number of suttas at the beginning of the Udana. Okay, then we come back to the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, and this is a very important passage in my view. So the Buddha is sitting at the foot of the goat herd's banyan tree, and he is pondering the question in his mind. First, he considers that this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle to be experienced by the wise. But people of the world delight in the objects of sensual pleasure, the objects of attachment. Then he considers it is hard for them to see this principle, namely dependent origination, and it is hard to see this principle, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. If I were to teach the Dhamma, others would not understand me, and that would be troublesome for me. And then his mind inclines to not teaching, but to just dwelling at ease, maybe just continuing to live on in the forest, enjoying the bliss of emancipation himself. Now, the reason I highlighted, I italicized this sentence here, 2 sentences, was it shows what I would consider the 2 realizations that the Buddha had through his enlightenment. One was the discovery of dependent origination, which shows the causal process that keeps us in bondage to the cycle of repeated birth and death. The chain of conditions, the hidden dynamics that underlie samsaric becoming. That is, it's the sequence of the way it's laid out traditionally of 12 conditioning factors. But in essence, what it means is the way ignorance, craving, and clinging together generate karmic constructive activities that propel us into a new existence that begins with what we call birth, but consists in the interplay of consciousness and nama rupa, consciousness and name and form, materiality and mentality. So that is the causal side of the Buddha's discovery, the discovery of dependent origination. And then came the corresponding discovery that by eliminating ignorance, by uprooting craving, by reaching a state of viraga, a sesa viraga, a remainderless dispassion towards all of the objects of clinging, it's possible to set off the cessation of the sequence of conditions, the ending of ignorance, the ending of craving, bringing the ending to the karmically constructive activities, and then the ending of consciousness and name and form, the ending of the process of rebirth, the discovery, the full realization of the unconditioned nibbana. So those are the two essential discoveries of the Buddha. But the problem, the question, the challenge he had is how to make this known to others, how to expound this, to present it to the world. And at first he inclined to remain silent, but then this deity Brahma Sahampati comes, appears before the Buddha and appeals to him, Bhante, please teach the Dhamma. There are those who will understand. And so the Buddha then accepts this request and he considers, who should I teach first? And then first he considers teaching Alara Kalama, but he discovers he's passed away. Then Uddaka Ramaputta, his other meditation teacher, but he's already passed away. And so now he considers to choose as his first disciples the 5 ascetics who attended on him during his period of ascetic practice. And so he realizes that those 5 ascetics are now living in the deer park near Benares. And so he goes to them and approaches them. And as the 5 ascetics see him coming in the distance, then they say, the ascetic Gautama is now coming to us, but he's given up his striving. He's gone back to a life of luxury. We shouldn't pay any special veneration to him, but if he comes to us, we could prepare a seat for him and we could accept him into our midst, but not as a teacher. But when the Buddha approaches, eventually with some difficulty, he convinces them that he's attained the supreme enlightenment, and he offers to teach them the Dhamma in such a way that they too, by practicing as instructed, can realize the deathless for themselves. So finally, the 5 monks agree to accept the Buddha as their teacher, and the Buddha teaches them the Dhamma. In the Ayya Pariyesana Sutta, we're not giving an account of what the Buddha actually taught the 5 monks. All that is said is that the Buddha was able to convince them, and then he instructed them, and then as they practiced as instructed, they too, like himself, attained the unborn, unaging, illness-free, deathless Nibbana. And they too attain this vision that their liberation is unshakable. This is their last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence. Okay, so this gives us the background to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And it also shows us why the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta has the particular structure that we find. The Buddha doesn't begin directly by teaching the 4 Noble Truths, but first he has to explain to the 5 ascetics why he is not following that course of extreme asceticism that he followed earlier when they were living together and practicing together. And he explains that the reason is because that practice of self-mortification is just painful, but it is un-Aryan. It's not noble, and it's anatta sanghita. It's not beneficial. And so the Buddha says, at sort of beginning his teaching, he announces that what he has discovered is the middle way, the middle path, So they all understand that to reach enlightenment and liberation, one has to avoid indulgence in sensual pleasures. That was sort of the common premise of all of the ascetic groups of ancient India and pretty much even today. But the dominant belief was that the way to liberation is through the practice of extreme austerities or self-mortification. But now the Buddha announces that what he has discovered is the middle way. The middle way is the way that gives rise to vision and knowledge. And so that is the key to liberation for the Buddha. Vision or insight into the truth, knowledge, understanding, comprehension of the truth. And that vision, that knowledge is to be attained not through extreme austerities, but through this middle way. And what is that middle way but the Noble Eightfold Path? And here, when the Buddha lays out the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, even though this would have been, now it's become sort of standardized Buddhist doctrine, but what would have been quite essential in communicating to the 5 ascetics, this is my own interpretation, since they would have already realized the importance of having right intention, giving up craving for sense pleasures, ill will, and harmfulness. They would have already been committed to an ethical life of right speech, right action, right livelihood. But what they would have needed would have been right view, right understanding, and the meaning of right effort. They would have been engaged in very strong effort, very strong striving, but that would have not been right effort. Their effort was the torment of the body, the affliction of the body. And for the Buddha, the key is right effort as the training of the mind, the training to remove the unwholesome states of mind and to generate and strengthen and perfect the wholesome qualities of the mind. So what would have been needed would have been right effort and right mindfulness, which would have been quite the unique discovery of the Buddha. Probably during the period leading up to the Enlightenment, he would have found the right mindfulness. And in my view, even though we have this traditional account of the Buddha just immediately in one evening going into all of the jhanas and reaching the 3 higher knowledges, but we could speculate that in the course of that previous day, the Buddha would have experimented with mindfulness of the observance of the body, observing the feelings, observing the states of mind. And then as he prepared for the jhanas, seeing the importance of eliminating the hindrances, contemplating the hindrances, and developing the bodhipakkhya, the bojjhangas, the factors of enlightenment. So we could say that the seeds of right mindfulness as a formal teaching probably already started to emerge in the period leading up to the Enlightenment. And then, of course, since the Buddha was aiming to go back into the jhanas, he discovered the importance of right concentration. So these were the factors, I think, that the Buddha had to convey to the group of 5 monks. And the right view will be presented through explaining the 4 noble truths that the Buddha discovered. And now, since my time is limited, I'm not going to go into the 4 noble truths in detail, but I just want to highlight some important principles that I find within the 4 noble truths that are often overlooked. First, when the Buddha says birth is suffering, often we think of this simply in maybe the biological sense that, okay, when a newborn baby comes out from the mother's womb, then they start crying, and in this way, birth is suffering. But I think to see the deeper aspect of this statement, we have to view it against the background, which is implicit in this whole exposition of the Four Noble Truths. The background is that of repeated existence within samsara, within the cycle of birth and death. So when the Buddha says that birth is suffering, he doesn't just mean that this one individual birth is painful because you have to get driven out from the mother's womb. Then you come out into the world and everything is so strange and incomprehensible, and you're slapped on the behind and you're experiencing painful feelings. But rather, it's taking birth again and again that is painful. And we even find this in the Dhammapada, which is supposed to be the verse that the Buddha declared immediately after the enlightenment. Aneka jati sangsarang anid. Aneka jati sangsarang. Excuse me, I always know it by memory, but now when I'm reciting for a talk. But anyway, the key line that's important here
Anekajati sangsarang
Go on, please.
Yeah, karakangave santo dukkha.
No, yeah, that's the one. Dukkha jati puna punang. So it's painful is birth again and again. So that's what's being underscored, I think, by the statement, birth is suffering. And that applies also to all of the other aspects or manifestations of dukkha that are indicated here. So old age, illness, death, and so forth. It's not that they are suffering or dukkha just on one occasion, but the background that the Buddha would have understood, that the five ascetics would have understood, that his disciples from later disciples would have understood, is that one is undergoing these experiences over and over without conceivable beginning. And so all of this is ways of underscoring the unsatisfactory nature of samsara in order to generate a kind of, maybe in Pali we use the word nibbida, a disenchantment towards this process of repeated existence within samsara. And then the essential meaning of the First Noble Truth is summed up in the statement that it is the five aggregates subject to clinging that are dukkha. So of course we know the five aggregates of material form, feeling, perception, the volitional activities, consciousness. So when we say that they're dukkha, it doesn't mean that they're actually always and inevitably felt and experienced as suffering. But when we look at the five aggregates, we see that this is what we cling to as the basis for our personal identity. And when we cling to these five aggregates, we build up a personal identity on the basis of these five aggregates. And by clinging to the five aggregates, we drive ourselves again and again into the cycle of birth, old age, and death. And what is meant ultimately by birth and old and age, illness and death is just the coming into being of the five aggregates, the decay of the five aggregates, and the breakup of the five aggregates, followed by a new arising, a fresh arising of the five aggregates. So in this way, these five aggregates are dukkha because they are the basis for all the other manifestations, the more decisive or the more acute forms of dukkha. Okay, then the second noble truth expounds the origin or cause of dukkha. And here the Buddha says that it is this craving. And now we come to an important description of this craving. You know, this is the way I think we have to pay close attention to the actual wording of the original text, because the way the relationship between the second noble truth and first noble truth is explained on a wide basis in popular Buddhism, it's almost always explained on what I call a psychological level, that because we have craving, we meet with suffering. When we fail to get what we want through the craving, we undergo suffering. When we lose the objects to which we're attached, we undergo suffering. When we become bored with the objects of enjoyment, and then we start craving new objects, there is dissatisfaction and suffering. So all of that is usually explained at this psychological level, which is valid, of course, as far as it goes. But what the Buddha is driving at, I think, in his expounding of the Four Noble Truths, is a dimension that I call the meta-psychological suffering. And I use the word meta here. It's not the word for loving kindness, but it's like the meta in metaphysics, that which lies beyond the psychological level. And that is what is underscored here by the expression which leads to new existence. There, the Pali word is pono bhavika, which is derived from punabhava, which is the word we came across earlier in the Declaration of Independence, the word which means renewed existence, repeated existence. So the adjectival form corresponding to punabhava is pono bhavika, and that is describing this craving. The craving is so called because craving is what propels the process of consciousness, the stream of consciousness from existence to existence. And then the craving is further highlighted by saying that it's accompanied by delight in lust. So the way I see it, delight and lust are actually two aspects of craving, two modes in which craving manifests. Lust, or raga, is the desire for what one does not have, the craving to obtain potential objects of possession. And then that lust drives the quest to acquire them. Then when one acquires the objects of desire, then one delights in them. One delights in them, enjoys them, and becomes attached to them at a subtle level. And so one finds delight in the objects that one acquires, but then one becomes disenchanted with the objects that one acquires, and one seeks delight elsewhere. And so this is the way craving works, always seeking delight, seeking pleasure, seeking enjoyment in one object after another, after another. And when one fails to obtain the full enjoyment, full satisfaction in this existence, then craving by its very nature drives one to seek delight in some other existence. And in this way, craving sustains, maintains the quest for new existence. Okay, then the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha comes through the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving. And then the way that leads to liberation, the way to the cessation of suffering, is the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so this is a section on the Four Noble Truths, but now the Buddha continues and he explains each noble truth from three perspectives, three different points of view, which are called, here it's called the three phases what we call it, the three turnings in regard to each noble truth. So the noble truth of dukkha is to be fully understood. And this has very profound meaning, many different dimensions. But the important point here, I think, what is to be fully understood, to understand the noble truth of dukkha, is to understand the five aggregates, especially to I think it would be important for people to mute the microphone because we're getting some. Yeah, so to understand the five aggregates, particularly to understand them in terms of the three characteristics, that they're all impermanent, that they're all unsatisfactory, that they're all anatta, non-self. So at this point, the Buddha hasn't yet fully explained the meaning of full understanding, but probably, perhaps even when he gave the discourse, he explained it in great detail. But in order to keep the sutta compact, the compilers had to edit out those portions and save them for other suttas. Okay, so this is the task regarding the noble truth of dukkha. And then the third aspect is the completion of that task. And that is the ability to declare that the truth of dukkha has been fully understood. So when the Buddha achieved that himself, then he could say that there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, clear knowledge, and light. Okay, the truth of the origin of dukkha, which is craving, that has its content, which we already went through, the different types of craving. Then the specific task is to abandon the origin of dukkha, to abandon craving. And to abandon craving, what has to be done? You can't abandon craving by an act of will, but to abandon craving, one has to trace craving to its own root, which is avidya, ignorance, and eliminate ignorance. And when ignorance is uprooted, then craving, which is its counterpart, its dependent counterpart, falls away with the arising of true vijja, true knowledge, true penetrative understanding through the full understanding of the truth of dukkha. So actually you could see an interesting relationship here. The truth of dukkha is to be fully understood. The full understanding of dukkha is vijja, knowledge, and knowledge arising. The arising of knowledge brings the abandoning of craving, the origin of dukkha. And then the truth of the cessation of dukkha is to be realized. And the truth of the cessation of dukkha is to be realized through the abandoning of craving. And again, craving is to be abandoned through the arising of knowledge, the full understanding of dukkha. So when dukkha is fully understood, craving is abandoned and the cessation of dukkha is realized. And the Buddha was able to declare, after his enlightenment, the truth of cessation has been realized. Then we have the truth of the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the particular task in regard to that noble truth. It's to be developed, to be practiced, to be cultivated. So one cultivates the Noble Eightfold Path as one cultivates the Eightfold Path through the stages of sila, or good conduct, samadhi, concentration, and panya, or wisdom. When that wisdom becomes fully mature, it brings the full understanding of dukkha, the abandoning of the origin, craving, and the other defilements, the realization of nibbana. And so the key, you could say, to the fulfillment of all four noble truths is the development of the truth of the path. Okay, then the Buddha says that as long as his knowledge and vision of the Four Noble Truths in these three phases, the three phases are the three angles, the truth itself, the task to be performed regarding that truth, and the completion of the task. So we have three phases, three angles, and Four Noble Truths. So we apply those three phases to each of the Four Noble Truths. And in this way, we get 12 aspects of this liberating knowledge and vision. And so as long as that knowledge and vision wasn't thoroughly purified in this way, the Buddha says, I didn't claim that I had attained the supreme enlightenment in this world. But when my knowledge and vision of the Four Truths was fully purified in these three phases and 12 aspects, then I could declare that I have attained the supreme enlightenment in this world. And then the Buddha concludes that exposition with what I called earlier the Declaration of Independence. The knowledge and vision arose in me, unshakable as the liberation of my mind. This is my last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence. Okay, there's more to the sutta, but I think since I'll have to go in about 10 minutes, perhaps it would be nice if we had a little sort of period of questions and some discussion.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, so please feel welcome to ask your question, and don't feel in any way shy or afraid.
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
So your suggestion that perhaps he had some understanding before the night of his enlightenment causes me to look again at that last part where he says that until it was fully purified, he did not declare that he had understood. Do you think that might suggest that he was purifying his understanding of the Four Noble Truths prior to that night?
Prior to the night of the enlightenment?
Yeah. I've never quite understood his statement that until it was purified, completely purified, he did not declare that he understood. He did not declare his enlightenment.
Well, I would say certainly he had to fully realize the third noble truth and fully cultivate and develop the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. What I would say is that before, even probably before the Buddha set out on his quest for enlightenment, before his renunciation, the motive for the renunciation would have been some understanding of the truth of dukkha, because we saw in the sutta on the noble quest, he says that he saw the danger in what is subject to birth, old age, sickness, and death, subject to sorrow, subject to defilement. So seeing the danger in that is in some way, some glimpse, some understanding, a spark of understanding of the truth of dukkha. And then in part of the shared ascetic culture of the Buddha's time would be an understanding that it is our craving and attachment that keep us bound to dukkha, and an understanding that to get free from dukkha, one has to renounce and overcome that craving and attachment. So I would say those are things that the Buddha would have understood even as sort of the background to his great renunciation and his embarking on the Aryan quest. But I'd say that sort of the very deep and profound understanding of the first noble truth and the actual abandoning of the second noble truth would have only occurred on the night of the enlightenment itself. That would be my understanding. Okay, I see. Do I get to see the participants?
Bhante, there was a request in the chat. Anagarika Vipasika or Aranya Bodhi has a question.
Okay. Okay.
Hello.
So please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question might be very similar to the question that was just asked. I didn't hear it all the way. But I'm wondering, what sense do you have of what the Buddha understood in his quest and before the enlightenment, in terms of these 37 factors of awakening, and in terms of what needs to be done? Do you have the sense there was kind of a map that he had, or a checklist that he had, or it was after the enlightenment where kind of a schematic vision of what unfolded became more clear to him? Or was it more of a process that happened as a bodhisattva?
Yeah, we have really almost nothing but speculation to go upon here. I would think that the formal classifications of the 37 Bodhipakkhiya Dhammas would have come certainly after the Buddha began his teaching career. In fact, in the Nikayas themselves, we don't even have the expression 37 Bodhipakkhiya Dhammas, but rather we have 7 groups of factors, which are often presented together. But that umbrella term, Bodhipakkhiya Dhammas, it seems in the Nikayas, it's used only for the 7, maybe it's only for the 7 factors of enlightenment, not for all 37, but the 37 are presented together. And what's interesting is that the Buddha lays down in the Noble Eightfold Path, as I said, right effort and right mindfulness in a kind of schematic way. And with, especially in the right mindfulness, a lot of detail in the analysis of right mindfulness. And the question comes, did the Buddha go through all of those practices of the Satipatthana Sutta before his enlightenment? You know, the traditional view was that this is a kind of knowledge that arises spontaneously in his mind. On the night of enlightenment, in one flash moment, all of these things come into the mind to equip him to fulfill the role of a Samma Sambuddha. But I wonder, sort of, if we come down to a real historical level, whether he experimented with some of these practices in the period after he gave up the extreme ascetic practices and started training himself to go back into the jhanas, whether he undertook these practices of contemplating the body in different ways, then observing the feelings, observing the states of mind, becoming acquainted with the hindrances, the things that are obstructive to the development, and then finding the factors that aided the process of concentration, and then develop these, maybe these, in a very rough way, these categories, even before the enlightenment. But all I have, again, is speculation about this.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, any other questions? Again, don't be shy.
Hello, Bhante, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, my question is about the difference between wisdom and insight. In this sutta, Buddha repeatedly says that vision, knowledge, wisdom, insight, and light arose in me. And I used to think wisdom and insight basically were synonyms, but it sounds like they're actually different terms, panya and vijja. So what is the difference between wisdom and insight?
Let's say the terms that used in the translation here. Yeah, actually the word insight is not used here, but the words of vision, which literally it's chakku, which means the eye. And then we have knowledge, which is jnana, and wisdom is panya. And then the fourth term is here, clear knowledge. This is vijja. So
Okay, that's
vijja
the
is,
one. That's
yeah.
the one I'm asking. What's the difference between that and panya, wisdom? The
Actually,
wisdom and the clear knowledge.
here they're being used pretty much as synonyms. Though usually panya is taken to begin at a more elementary level. So even when one is doing the contemplation of phenomena as being impermanent, dukkha, anatta, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanent, dukkha, non-self, that is the development of panya. But it's when the panya goes through various stages of different levels of depth and profundity. So it's when the panya reaches a very profound level where it actually opens up and directly discerns the Four Noble Truths, then we could say it becomes vijja, clear knowledge. So I say that panya, in a way, all of these terms are synonyms, but panya has a broad range from the initial stages of insight, which would be in this practice of vipassana, all the ways to the stage of deep realization, where it becomes vijja, this clear knowledge.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, we could take maybe time for maybe one more question.
Bhante, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, my question is about principles and truth. So you pointed out that in the Ayya Pariyesana Sutta, the two main understandings that the Buddha came to were the dependent origination and nibbana as the cessation of dukkha.
Yeah.
And these principles, maybe I understand to be the underlying order in a changing universe. These are the principles that are operating underneath that. And how does that compare to satya, to the truth, say, of the Four Noble Truths?
Yeah, the word that's used in the Ayya Pariyesana Sutta for dependent origination and nibbana, they're both called, the word is thana. So the word thana actually is clearer from the Sanskrit form. Sthana, it's related to the English word stand or station. And it's also used in the sense of a case, a position. Yeah, so the word thana is used for dependent origination and nibbana as cessation of dukkha. They're not called satya in this place, but later we could say that in relation to the Four Noble Truths, we could say that dependent origination is a kind of elaboration of the second noble truth, of the truth of the origin of dukkha. In fact, it presents a fuller or clearer exposition of the truth of the origin of dukkha. And of course, nibbana becomes the third noble truth, the truth of the cessation of dukkha.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so why the Buddha uses thana in one place, satya in the other, that I don't know.
okay, thank you. If there's one more term I could throw into the mix, how about the term niyama as a principle? How does that relate?
Niyama.
Yeah.
Yeah, nama is used in relation to dependent origination.
Well, I meant niyama, like the principles, the laws, certain kinds of laws. It's a commentarial term, but it does appear in the suttas also. I've been confused about these different kinds of truth. That's why I'm
Yeah.
asking these questions.
Yeah, the word niyama seems to refer to, you use the English word, an order, the way things are ordered,
Yeah,
the way
exactly.
things work. Yeah, so to my knowledge, niyama is generally used in relation to Dhamma niyama as dependent origination. So that shows the way these various conditioning factors work together. You know, so that's the order of conditionality.
Okay. It's helpful. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Who is that, may I ask, who was that just asked that question?
Oh, this is Kim Allen.
I thought I was thinking, well, I bet that's Kim Allen. I was thinking that.
Thank you for the talk, Bhante.
Okay. Okay. So I'll have to end now. So let me end just with a blessing and with wishing all of you will be entering upon the Vasa in, it's Monday, isn't it? The 6th.
We're entering the Vasa tomorrow.
You're entering tomorrow. I had,
Yes,
you know,
we are. Bhante.
earlier I had looked up when the Vasa begins in Thai and Sri Lankan tradition, and I found that it was to begin at the beginning of August and go to the end of October. This would have been about a month ago. And then in the email, Ayya Tathaloka mentioned that you would be entering upon the Vasa tomorrow. Then I went to the internet again and I looked, when does the Vasa begin for Sri Lanka and Thailand? And I found that it's now beginning July. It seems that the date was changed at some point. I think it was 1 month ago that I looked at, maybe it was 3 months ago. But I'm sure that it was set for August because I was a bit displeased with that because it's more convenient for me to have it run from July to the end of October.
For us also, because of the fire season.
I see, I see. Okay, so let me all wish you all a happy, peaceful, and fruitful Vasa, and then recite some verses of blessing. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sadasoti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sadasoti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba sanganubhavena sadasoti bhavantu te.